I've just got quite good questions and I've got views. So this is an ideal chance to kind of put thoughts out there and have a discussion about it at the end. There is a lot in this. I kind of prepared for about 40 minutes, but I'll keep it a bit shorter. And you will all get copies of this presentation, so you can kind of look at some of the detail, some of the data in your own time. But the general kind of feeling here really is that this isn't about automation. You know, the future of marketing isn't about automating. It's not about efficiency. It's about elevation. It's about how can we do things better rather than merely faster or cheaper. And I want us to take a bit of a step back, because sometimes we get too good at our jobs and we get too close to them. And I think that it's a really interesting time to kind of forget about the preconceptions we have of what marketing is and what it looks like, and forget about the assumptions that we make, and think, you know, if we had no idea what we were doing and we were to be born today, what would we start making instead? Because I genuinely believe that we've never had a more powerful canvas of possibility. I've never thought that what we did has been more important. We are in an age of absolute abundance. We are completely overwhelmed by choices that we need to make every day. And the role of brands, and therefore marketing, and therefore seductive information, has never been more important. And in some ways, AI kind of comes at the best time, because it gives us a chance and a kind of excuse, really, I think, to be much more ambitious about what we do, to rethink many of the things that we do, to correct maybe some of the mistakes that we've been making, and together aim a little bit higher. So I'm going to kind of cover this as best I can. I'm going to give us a bit more sort of context to where we are, a bit more of a sort of intro into AI and how it works, a bit more about current best practice, some focus on AI and what it means for consumer behavior, and then AI and what it means for business. Now, to talk about all of these in one presentation is kind of impossible. So I'll just sort of give a bit of a sort of skim, I guess, to where we are. My role very quickly is just understanding how technology is changing business. How does it change the way that we live our lives? And therefore, how is it changing marketing? And it's also focused on what's not changing as well, because it's very easy to go around all the time talking about everything is different, but actually it's also essential to look at the majority of things in our life which are not changing, because it's that context that gives us the ability to focus on what matters. I find advertising and marketing to be in this very interesting position right now. We used to have what we called above the line, and then we had below the line, and then that kind of turned into this different line, which was kind of brand or performance. And what we've created in about the last 10 years, and I've been writing about this a lot recently, is these two sort of very different tribes of marketers, and they both think they're doing the same job. And I'm not the first to talk about this idea of the mad men and the math men, but we really are in an environment where, you know, brand people are still in the business of sort of films and creating feeling and wonder, and the math men really are in this sort of industry of dashboards and this idea that everything's in the data. We used to have what was a kind of traditional playbook where big brands would do big ads. And then we had the sort of performance playbook where smaller companies who didn't have access to bigger budgets, who needed to be more sort of niche, they would follow the performance playbook. And these two playbooks were both absolutely brilliant, but unbelievably different. And for a long time, the culture of these businesses and the culture of the way that marketing and advertising was unbelievably different. But what's tended to sort of happen, and if you look here at some of the kind of the levers that people pull, you know, the brand stuff is about allure, seduction. It's about being remarkable. There's an acceptance that what we do is indirect. Our jobs are based on sort of judgment and empathy. And the performance playbook is very much based on dashboards, on three-letter acronyms, on optimization, not actually on being remarkable, but being the same as other people. Not about being indirect and creating good stuff, but on closing the loop and creating attribution. And I'm being a bit sort of cheeky here, but I think the people on the left kind of knew that what they did worked, but they couldn't really explain it. And I tend to think the people on the right kind of know precisely what's working, even if it doesn't. That whole world is very much about taking credit for success that may have happened anyway. Now, what's happened very recently, and this is where it gets very relevant to us, is now the traditional playbook is dying. Of all of the ad spend in the world, only about 20% of spend is on this. And the performance playbook isn't just becoming the performance playbook, it's becoming the culture and the operating system and the mindset for marketing. So we now expect everything to be measured. We expect everything to be immediate. We expect things to be somewhat automated. We expect things to be systematized. We expect things to be somewhat robotic. And if we are in a situation where AI, quote unquote, does take our job, it's basically because we've made the job possible to be done by a robot. We've made ourselves more equivalent and more identical, and we've sort of removed what makes us brilliant and remarkable and weird and eccentric and empathetic and imaginative. We're now in a situation where people are kind of happy to let the computers decide. It's now quite common for very large companies to simply upload assets and let the algorithms do stuff. And I won't harp on about it, but it's a complete disgrace. I mean, the ad on the left here is a sort of beautiful ad for a very premium cruise company. And they're also running the ads on the right because the algorithms are deciding that's better. And the dashboard may show the ad on the right performs better, but any human being knows that that's kind of nonsense. So that's the kind of context in which we're doing our job, where slowly but surely we're expecting things to be immediate, we're expecting things to be defendable, we're expecting things to be attributable, we're expecting to close the loop. I hate people who go around saying something is like teenage sex, and people have been saying this about a lot of technology for a long time, but there's something that's somewhat true about the emotion that's out there, which is this sense that everyone else is ahead of you, that everyone else is doing amazing stuff, that everyone else is comfortable, that everyone else knows what this is, that everyone else is kind of showing off about it. And there is this really weird dynamic, I think, in the industry where a lot of people feel like they're behind and a lot of people feel like they don't even know what questions to ask. So this section here is to try and give everyone a bit of a broad shared understanding of what AI is. Everyone's knowledge on AI is unbelievably different. So when I present this, I'm really aware that some people know far more than me and think they should be doing the presentation, and they like to catch you out by asking very specific questions. And some people are still not that well practiced in it and are not experimenting with it and are still a bit bemused by it. So if this is under or over you, then apologies. A lot of things that we used to call AI are actually not AI. Like a lot of things that are sort of celebrated as AI are actually much more basic. A lot of the things that we now call AI are things that we used to call something else. So these days you can talk about big data as AI, you can talk about the Internet of Things, you can talk about predictive analytics, robotics. All of these things are stuff that we now call AI because AI has become a very helpful way to get funding, a very helpful way to justify job losses, a very helpful kind of strategic lever to pull in the boardroom. But it's creating an awful lot of complexity and confusion and chaos out there. AI is actually a whole bundle of things which are remarkably different to each other. So a robotic arm is AI, a drone is AI, a humanoid robot is AI, a really sophisticated chatbot is AI, image generation is AI, robotic process automation is AI. These things are radically different in terms of their meaning and radically different in terms of their implementation, but they are all technically AI. So often when we're talking about AI, it's unhelpfully vague. A lot of people sort of conflate generative AI for AI. Actually, sort of generative AI is a fairly narrow subset of AI that focuses on creation from patterns. So every time anyone asks you about what your AI strategy is, you really try to make sure they're clear on precisely what form of AI they mean and what the kind of boundaries of the conversation are. And even when you're talking about generative AI, you're still talking about a whole bunch of different things, all of which have completely different implications, all of which have completely different meaning and business cases. I'm going to explain a little bit about it. If I had to simplify most readily what generative AI and what large language models are all about, it's all about patterns in data. It's all about being able to predict what should follow in a sequence based on relationships found in a giant corpus of data. This is a nice way to think about it. This is how image recognition started. What happened was researchers uploaded millions of pictures of cats and millions of pictures of dogs into a database, and they ascribed particular characteristics to the image that made it a cat and particular characteristics that made it a dog. And then they asked it to recognize the two. And then when it got it wrong, there were humans employed to correct it. And over time, it learned. It learned what the defining characteristics of a cat and a dog were. I did this presentation to Adobe in about 2016, and it was hilarious because it wasn't very good. So you could show pictures of puppies or bagels, and it couldn't tell the difference. It couldn't tell the difference between a chihuahua and a muffin. It couldn't tell the difference between labradoodle and chicken. It couldn't tell the difference between parrots and guacamole. It was terrible. And in 2016, everyone laughed and they felt secure in their jobs because you could kind of see how hard this was going to be. And then we got more and more and more and more data, and we had more and more and more people feeding back on it, and we had more and more resolution to that data, more and more computing power, and then it got really good. And one of the things that people don't really want to tell you about this stuff is it's actually much better than the people who make it think it should be. There is something quite mysterious about how amazing it is at doing almost everything. It's not emergent. I mean, we can talk about that later on. It's not breaking out of the models. It's just better. So you can upload a picture, and not only will it know what things are, but it can start to know relationships between stuff. It can start to do things in amazing detail. You can upload your golf swing and it'll tell you where you're going wrong. It'll understand actions. It can understand human emotions. It can start to predict what people might do. Something like a self-driving car is extraordinary because it can actually make reasonable predictions about whether a child's going to jump in a road and chase after a ball. So that's amazing. Then someone realized if you turn the whole thing around, rather than it telling you what a dog was, you could just say, make a dog. And again, I think it was about 2017, I was back again and I was showing these images, and they weren't very good. It was remarkably bad. You could hardly tell what these images are. They're tiny and they took hours to make. And then it got remarkably good. And you all know this, but you can type anything into a whole array of sites. This is a candid paparazzi style photograph of Karl Marx hurriedly walking through the parking lot of the Mall of Americas. And it does it. And it used to be bad because it didn't know stuff. You used to ask it to draw a picture of salmon in a river, and it would have a picture of frozen salmon from Publix in the river. It wouldn't understand that the context of a river meant it was the fish, not the food item. And now it's unbelievably good. And now you can spend your life creating beautiful images. Then people realized that it could make videos because videos are just images moving. This is from 2023. And again, we all laughed. This is terrible. The number of fingers is changing. Like, it's just all over the place. It's absolutely disturbing. And then within about 12 months, we had this. So you can now type anything into Google VO3 and it will generate remarkably sort of interesting images. So this is sort of vox pops in the street of New Orleans with sort of slightly drunk, flirty people. This is a fisherman sort of poetically talking about life on the sea. It's unbelievably good, and it keeps on getting better. This is the latest model from China, which renders out images and videos which are unbelievably realistic. Even the kind of physics of how things are moving is extraordinary. And you could spend a lifetime kind of showing, amazing clips. This is now Will Smith eating spaghetti. The degree to which we've gone from something which is unbelievably awful to something which is freakishly good is extraordinary. AI can also write code. In a weird way, code is almost the perfect thing for AI to create because it's all based on logic and pattern. There's no room for subjectivity. There's no room for imagination. It's just something that works or doesn't. I was very rude about this because people kept on telling me they were making stuff with code, and I was like, well, you keep on telling me that you're making it, but you don't show me what you're doing. So I went on LinkedIn. I was like, right, if this is so good, then make me a website for a dog grooming company in Miami. Because I knew this was going to be hard, because this needs a back end, it needs like an integration with credit card providers, it needs access to a calendar. And then someone made this, and it was nearly perfect, and they made it in about 25 minutes. And then I realized they'd done something which wasn't helpful, which is if both locations are in Miami, I just want the next available appointment. I don't want to pick the location. And I thought that would set them back about an hour. And 37 seconds later, they came back with the perfect site. This was also not like a coding genius. This was a teacher from Rwanda who just happened to follow me. So it's actually quite extraordinary what this can do in areas like codes. There's now a sort of movement, I'll talk about this in a bit, towards agents. The idea of an agent is you're not just getting it to do one thing. You're not just getting it to write an email, you're basically giving it a task to do. So what you're asking it to do is to sort of hack into your browser, and a little bit like an automatic button pusher, you're asking it to sort of take over your screen, read things, understand things, click on things, make decisions. And what we're really getting is something that can start to do elements of people's jobs. And that's where it gets quite interesting. It can obviously also make text, so you can write a poem about speaking at a conference in Sydney. And then you start to realize that actually kind of a lot of what we do is text, really. Like it's not just poetry, it's your emails, it's contracts, it's advice, it's business strategy, it's a SWOT analysis, it's ideas, it's ad copy, it's summarizing things, it's customer service, it's conversations, it's this list itself. Sometimes I use AI to help me do stuff, and sometimes you need someone to come up with other things that are escaping your mind at that point. So then you get to this sort of fascinating point where if you take a step back, something which is as specific as generative AI actually means a lot of different things for us. So sometimes it's doing the work for us. Sometimes it's advising us and helping us humans lead the process. And increasingly, people are using it to explore. So people are using it to help them be more creative and to challenge themselves to be better and to teach themselves stuff. I know I'm going quite fast, but I feel like people are awake and stuff. Okay, good. It's always quite strange doing this virtually, because when you're in a room, you can sort of see people looking confused or checking their phone or something. So what we've got at the moment really is what always happens with technology, which is when something new comes along, the only way we know how to apply it is to sort of fit into the existing system. This is quite a profound point, actually. I could write a book on this. And the only way it really gets put in place is if it's faster or cheaper, because that's how businesses work. It's really hard to do a business case for we're going to do it better, because what's the value of that? Whereas if you say, we can do it in 37 minutes, not 3 days, an accountant gets very excited. So we always have this kind of S-curve. This happened with electricity. This happened with plastic. This happened with radio waves. It happened with digital technology, where we have this kind of period of time where we apply it to what we've done before and we sell it on it being cheaper or faster. And then we have a nice period of time where we start to do things better. And then we have a whole different period of time where we do things differently. So cheaper or faster, we might take the electric oven and we'll make a cheaper and faster oven. And then we'll make something better, like an automated oven that is, much more has air circulation and stuff. And then we'll make something different, like a microwave oven or an air fryer. And it's worth looking at that ease of adoption, because at the moment, AI is not really a threat to many people because our jobs are really, really complicated. So if you took a sort of average person's job, and you were to sort of break it down in a very structured way, people have lots of different responsibilities in their jobs. Each of their responsibilities involve different things, and then each of those different things involves lots of different things. So you might be a receptionist, but you're still kind of, health and safety and a fire warden and a friendly face and gossip. But ultimately, every job can be boiled down into particular tasks. Now, AI at the moment has been amazing at this task level, but it's not replaced anyone's job at the moment because most people's jobs involve lots and lots of different stuff. So you might be a brand manager, you might have a project which is to kind of make a go-to-market strategy. That might involve market research, and then that might involve writing a brief for a researcher. And the AI is very good at these sort of atomic level things. So at the moment, I could talk all day about the different tasks that it does. It takes notes, it can make phone calls, it can make slides, but it's not that exciting to me because we still have to switch. We still have to kind of go from one app to another. We still have to go from one mode to the other, and that's really, really exhausting. Perhaps we can talk about this in the discussion, but lots of people are very excited about agents because in theory, this new wave of agents can do things for us. They can take permission, they can save folders, they can delete files, they can take ownership, they can make decisions, they can actually sort of serve people. But there's obviously some massive security and privacy and sort of moral sort of concerns really with this. At this point, I decided to channel what I thought Paul Frampton might be saying to me. Just tell us what people have been doing and what to learn from. So I thought I'd give you some AI best practice. I have spent the last 18 months trying to answer this question, which is let's get the really, really sexy consultancies. Let's get the really sexy tech companies and let's keep on reading their press releases. Let's go on their website. Let's meet up with people and have coffees and say it's off the record. And when I look at what people are talking about, it's still not that exciting. This is a company called Board of Innovation, which is great, but the work they talk about isn't that exciting. This is Google's press releases. If you actually look at what they're talking about, it's not that exciting. This is the Joe Malone AI Scent Advisor, which if you ask me is a bit like a sort of teenage magazine quiz. It's like, what type of husband should you have? Do you like sport? It doesn't really feel very AI. This, if you're Google and you're worth $4 trillion, I feel like there should be something a bit more exciting that you can talk about. So I'm not going to cover this in detail. You can go to OpenAI's website, you can go to stories, and you will see all sorts of really nice stories, like really, really sort of pleasant things. People doing stuff with conversational AI, people using AI to automate some parts of sending invoices, but it's not really kind of setting my imagination on fire, really. And I think this is my way of getting out of Paul's question, by the way. I think, in all honesty, the very best work in AI is not yet in the public domain, because if you've got like an unbelievable competitive advantage, you don't talk about it. I do think a lot of the best AI work has not come to fruition yet, or at least is not ready to be presented. And I do think smaller companies are leading the way because it's a hell of a lot easier to employ AI in a tiny company that is agile and perhaps doesn't have a particularly good way of doing things at the moment. It's always much easier with technology not to change, but to build something. And therefore, if you're McDonald's and you've got hundreds of people and you've got politics and you've got relationships and you've got obligations and you've got agencies and you've got terms and conditions and procurement, it's unbelievably hard. If you're a kind of local chain of, tire fitters, your nephew or your niece can have a go. So what I see at the moment, and I'm being really miserable here, but a lot of the AI cases are really chatbots. A lot of them are recommender systems, like Netflix telling you what film to watch next. A lot of them are stuff that we would have called big data. A lot of stuff are really about optimization, which we've been talking about since 2012. A lot of them are voice, which is great, but quite niche. A lot of them are just visual effects. It's not even sort of AI. It's just stuff that we'd have done in a Flame studio. And a lot of them are personalization at scale, which again, we've kind of been talking about since about 2013, 2014. So the work that I find a little bit more exciting is ads that are made properly with AI. There was an ad made by Kalshi in particular, which I thought was extraordinarily compelling. I mean, it was appropriate for their market, but it wasn't right for a proper company. Synthetic data testing. I don't know whether to believe this or not. I have quite lively conversations with Mark Ritson about this. There is a theory that you can basically use synthetic audiences to test anything. So you can do focus groups with not real people. You can even do market sizing with not real people. You can do media mix modeling with not real people. I think it's a little bit snake oily to me, but I defer to people knowing more. AI knowledge management, I think, is amazing. If you're a huge company, just imagine how many presentations you have which are repeated. Just imagine how much stuff there is that the person that just left knew, and now it's gone. Just imagine how much institutional knowledge you could draw upon if you were able to deal with the fact that people can't file things properly. And data cleansing is it's very boring. But when I work with clients, by far the biggest problems people end up having are really data strategy problems. It's really governance problems. It's really the French office measured footfall in a different way. So the ability of AI to do boring stuff, which actually makes a really big difference, is amazing. I did think I'd showcase this company because this is quite against what AI is about. This is a company in Australia that was asking me for kind of funding. The idea here is that most of my criticisms of AI is it's about reinforcement. So it's about taking the average of what people have done before. There is this thing that you can dial up called heat, which is basically a way to dial up randomness. And what this means is that AI can be a little bit weird and unexpected. And this means that every part of an advertising process, for example, you can basically have a kind of sparring partner that does things that are a little bit differently. The theory of this is amazing. When I actually look at the quality of work, I don't think it's very good, to be honest. I still think it's a bit cliched. I think it's a bit naive. I don't think much of what it's saying is true. I don't think Patagonia has, a relationship with Beyond Meat. But there is something in this. There is a kind of like a mind gym to having something that's sort of throwing stuff. But what I kind of conclude from this, and I'm not being sort of cynical, is that you're not late. You're not the people that are left behind. There's not this sort of underground meeting group of people that are smug about everything they've accomplished with this. This is a very good time to be experimenting with this stuff. There's nothing to be fearful of, but I would sort of ask people to not do the brief, which is, do an AI thing. AI should be part of the toolkit that we have, which allows us to do amazing things. But the brief should always be, how can we work better? Or how can we incentivize people more accurately? Or how can we improve our company culture? Or how can we bring new people into the brand? How can we make sure that our advertising is more relevant? That's the brief, not, what can we do with AI? I will cover these things quite quickly. There's two more things to kind of tease you with. There are basically two different aspects to AI, which I think we should focus on. One, which is how is AI changing consumer behavior? And the other is sort of going back to operations a bit more. Our job is to connect with people, and therefore we need to know where people are spending their time. There is an argument that suggests that a big media channel in the future will be people spending time with AI characters. I don't think this is necessarily going to happen for the target audiences that we tend to care about, because we tended to not care about gamers because it wasn't sort of, how we saw our audience. So I'm not convinced that this will be a big thing, but it might be. People have made graphs where the numbers get big quickly, but it's basically guesswork. I think AI discovery and recommendation has the potential to be absolutely vast. It's always hard when you do what we do to know how weird we are. And everyone that's a bit like me is doing stuff like this all day long. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's mainstream. But especially when it comes to decisions which are quite rational and boring, so not a honeymoon destination because people enjoy the process, but what's a good, pet insurance policy, or, what kind of health insurance would you recommend? Or, what's a good type of price to pay for, windscreen wiper replacement. For some things, AI discovery and AI recommendation will be a huge thing. I still think that a lot of this doesn't actually change that much, because if I ask AI to recommend an oven and it recommends a brand I've never heard of, I'm probably still, I'm going to go to the website, but unless the product is good and the site feels good, I'm probably going to go with a Gaggenau or a Miele or something, because I kind of know that's good. Increasingly, AI discovery and recommendation is kind of a bit like SEO anyway. Like the tactics that people use, because I do believe that companies should be investing in this, are actually quite like the tactics they would use for SEO. I could talk about this for a really long time, but we don't have time now. But there's a lot of sort of snake oil being sold in this space, because actually it's very difficult to know how your brand appears on, it's called GEO, generative engine optimization. There's obviously going to be a huge thing with kind of AI ads, which is when you're in an LLM like ChatGPT, people will increasingly be placing ads. This is sort of hot off the press. This is what ads in ChatGPT are going to look like. They're going to be very expensive, and by the looks of things, they're not particularly good, because there's this really tricky balancing act here between trust and privacy. Whereas if I go to sort of ChatGPT and say, my wife has got pain in her legs because she's heavily pregnant, if you start getting ads for, pain cream, there's a point at which you're not being relevant. You're just being extremely creepy. So there's going to be a lot of really interesting conversations about this over the years. There's also conversational shopping, this idea that a kind of bots-like experience will help you buy things. I tend to think these are quite niche, because I don't think real people really behave like this. I think people quite like shopping. And there's this whole thing about agentic shopping. People are going absolutely crazy about agentic shopping. Lots of people are saying you don't need a website anymore because everything's going to be read by bots, and American Airlines are going to have their tickets bought by bots, and therefore they don't need a website because it's all going to be bots. I don't think that's true at all. I think companies have spent the last 25 years trying to make sure that bots can't access their website. And I think it's a fairly unusual person that will outsource many of their decisions to bots. So I tend to think that agentic shopping is a bit of a waste of time. It's about as big as voice shopping, which made sense to technology people, but didn't make sense to real people. Whereas I think that agentic discovery, GEO, will be very, very big, but a lot of that is really sort of SEO. Basically, every part of what we do, and you can go through it piece by piece, can be enhanced by AI. There's a lot of strength of AI as a sort of general admin enabler. This is Microsoft Copilot. I do have questions about the degree to which work is now going to expand to fit the technology available. There was a really good piece that came out in Harvard Business Review overnight, which was basically saying companies are now full of the same number of people being more productive, getting more stuff done, but what they're doing is less helpful and more chaotic, and therefore it's kind of not really working out for many places. I think AI is amazing as a creative partner. I think there is really interesting potential in AI and personalization for the right types of category. I think it's always important to think about what you have a right to do and what is genuinely helpful. I think it's fascinating to think of what can be semi-automated because it doesn't matter that much. A friend of mine sort of runs Vacation Sunscreen, and he uses AI for a lot of their social content because it's really good. And also it's only organic content on Instagram. Like it's not necessarily going to change the world. I do think it sort of democratizes creativity. It doesn't really mean a lot to the best brands on the world, but it means an awful lot to companies that were not able to accomplish that much. So if you are a local gym or, a campsite or operating cooking classes, you can now make ads that are nearly as good as a big company. I think it's amazing for for training. Now, basically anyone can learn anything. And I think, as I said before, it's amazing for accessing sort of institutional knowledge. I think it gets really exciting when we take a bit of a step back, and we start to sort of restructure how we work. Because we've always, and rightfully so, we've had this process where we have the people, and then we figure out the best structure, and then we figure out the best process, and then we figure out the best tools to support them. And I'm a very sort of human first person, but I still think that AI may be profound enough that actually we can start to go the other way a little bit and think about what tools should we use, and then what's the best kind of process to operate with those tools, and then where do people need to be, and what do we need humans in the loop for, and what can be totally automated, and what do we not need to do anymore. And then around that structure, we then sort of put the very, very best people. I think it's possible to almost create like a new operating system for this. I was working with Stellantis to basically create what would be a kind of an operating system for their franchises. So I'm going to stop there so we have plenty of time to discuss things, but there's a lot there, I think.